Sesa Prabhu, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
So my obeisances, Gopal Bhatta Prabhu. Thank you very much for having me on.
Oh, Hare Krishna Prabhu. I might just add before we begin, there's a few, of course, I am most fallen disciple of Srila Prabhupada, but there's a few disciples of Srila Prabhupada that choose to celebrate November 14th as his disappearance day. And I happen to be one of them. And of course, that's the calendar day that he disappeared.
Yes.
So I thought to mention his divine grace at the beginning of our call.
But always auspicious to remember Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. So, yeah, we're very fortunate to have you. You know that we have an audience and two types of audience, people that have joined us live, but then people who will see this in the upcoming days. And then, of course, we keep them as a legacy, too. So maybe many people know you. You're a famous devotee, of course, but but maybe we can just start with a little bit of your background. Why did you join Krishna consciousness?
Well, that's in my mind a very interesting question. I hope your viewers will also find it interesting, because I think each of us is unique in how we join Krishna consciousness. But why is appropriate for me, because I wasn't someone that was into yoga or Eastern thought or religiosity at all. I didn't know what a guru was and wasn't looking for a guru. But what I did find attractive and why I decided to join was because I found a group of people who lived their life without compromise. They lived their choices without compromise. And let me put that in context a bit, because it has to do with what I was doing. I was a political activist, trying to make a difference in the world through politics and leadership of society. And one thing that always bothered me about whatever political organization I was with was how they had to compromise to get anything done. Yeah. How if you started out as a young politician with fresh ideas for society, how by the time you got to a place where you could implement those ideas, you were so compromised that you couldn't make any difference, or at least the original difference you wanted to make. At that time in ISKCON, there was the In God We Trust party for Purified Leaders.
Right.
Devotees like Bhaktivedanta Prabhu and Amarendra Prabhu were running for office, and just seeing them with the shaved heads going in debates with the other candidates, convinced me that here are people that without compromise have beliefs and they follow them. So that attracted me to join Krishna consciousness.
What challenges did you face when you originally joined?
Well, besides the family challenges, parents upset and friends.
Your parents must have had dreams for you, huh?
Well, yeah, my father was a career military officer, and I had, when I graduated high school, I went to the United States Military Academy at West Point, and so I was clearly following.
You went to West Point?
Yes, I did.
Whoa!
And
let's just pause there for a minute. Many of our audience may not know West Point. Tell us what West Point is. It's a phenomenal place.
Well, it's the United States Military Academy, the official school where the U.S. military forces train their leaders. Mainly it's an engineering school, but obviously it's the military training and objectives are part of the education there.
It is the best military institution, training institution in college in the world. I mean,
yeah, well, there were there students from around the world, 1 or 2 countries. They sent their top students to attend the academy with us. I do want to make it the point, though, that I stayed there 2 years, and then I found the same problem of that having to compromise. So I left there, and that's where I continued my search, trying to find an uncompromising stance that one could take and dedicate his life to.
Mm.
And I found it in Srila Prabhupada's movement, and so it was an easy fit for me, although others found it difficult, my parents, etc.
Right, right. Srila Prabhupada was totally uncompromising. Sometimes he would speak the truth, and it would almost be shocking to some of the people that would be listening to him. Tell us just briefly your feelings about Srila Prabhupada and his uncompromising standards.
Well, of course, he's our Acharya, and as you rightly pointed out at the beginning of the session here, we're greatly missing his presence today, November 14th. That date's burned in all of our memory as the date Prabhupada left this world. But even to the point of leaving this world, he was dictating almost defiant purports to his books, to give his disciples and others the firm faith that if you dedicate your life to Krishna, then nothing but good can come of it, despite what may be initially seen as reverses in life. Just like so many of Prabhupada's disciples, they gave up so much to join, and it might seem that that was a reversal in their life. But I bet you, if you ask them, and certainly if you ask me, you'll find no regret in having made those uncompromising stances in Krishna consciousness.
So over time, you accepted more and more responsibility. I recall, I think in maybe it was the 80s, you were a BBT trustee, or was that in the 90s? I can't quite remember.
80s and into the early 90s, yes.
Yeah, okay. And then at a certain point, you became a GBC member. What year did you become a GBC member?
In 1994, Veera Bahuprabhu, who I was living in Los Angeles at that time, and Veera Bahuprabhu, who was also there, asked me to help him with his zone in the Caribbean. So I traveled with GBC duties for the first time in 1994 to Trinidad, Guyana, Puerto Rico, and Santo Domingo, Dominican Republic.
So staying on with this theme of standards and uncompromising standards, you must have faced a certain amount of this in the areas of responsibility that you've had. You've had some of the greatest responsibilities of any devotee in the movement. How do you feel, and how do you deal with that? Is that even a big challenge at this point?
It's a challenge, and the challenge that I've found it to be is that devotees are very sincere, but sometimes they come into conflict. And conflict often brings out the worst in people, even devotees. And so how to find a method to bring the devotees together and at the same time resolve their rightly generated differences about how to preach Krishna consciousness has been, a challenge that the GBC has sort of saddled me with almost every year when I go to Mayapur. There's a new challenge someplace in the world. See if they're complaining to the GBC to do something. So they looked to, it seems like the same devotees, including myself and others, every year to deal with these things. And so it can be challenging to see division, but it's also an opportunity to explore ways to find common ground. And that's what Prabhupada actually wanted us to do, not just problem solve that I did, but he wanted the GBC to discuss unity and diversity, because he could understand that many devotees come from many backgrounds all around the world. They may have different perspectives on how to accomplish something, and how to keep those different perspectives from tearing us apart, but rather you make them so they bring us together and give us a strength is the challenges that I've often faced in my GBC service.
Srila Prabhupada has as unity and diversity one of what you might call one of his primary set of managerial leadership, cultural dynamics. How do you think ISKCON and we have done in terms of establishing unity and diversity?
Well, that's a good question, because I think that we could always do better, but that doesn't mean that we haven't been able to achieve what Prabhupada wanted to some degree. I think that, maybe you've discussed it with others in this same kind of series of interviews, but if you ask any of the GBC members, I think you'll find that they'll say that they have in themselves in doing their service, how do I want to say it? They have faced the differences, diversity, and that they've tried their best to bridge the gap and keep the unity. And given the number of GBC members there are and different circumstances around the world, the fact that that body still meets annually, twice annually, and is planning through efforts like yourself and others are making, still planning for a united future, is evidence that unity and diversity can be achieved. That doesn't mean everything is smooth. I mean, you know that as well as I do. But I think if we look at the factual history of Vaishnava organizations and what ISKCON and the GBC have done over the last 40, 50 years, we've done okay. We're still together, and I think the desire is to stay together and to better our positions with unity and diversity.
Sometimes it seems to me that, we're here in this world because we've made some futile attempt to claim independence from Krishna. And this independent nature thrives in this notion of diversity. And maybe it's even one of the deeper psychological issues that many people are saying, diversity, leave me alone. I want to do whatever I want to do. And they're often leaving unity off to the side a bit. Do we need to get more in balance between these two dynamics? It seems like maybe there's a proliferation of diversity, but just not quite, we haven't quite found all of the unity elements to keep us together.
Well, I think you're right at that, Gopal Bhatta Prabhu. Therefore, Prabhupada's complete statement just wasn't unity and diversity. He says, meet every year in Mayapur to discuss unity and diversity. So we have to keep coming together if we're going to take the full meaning of Prabhupada's quoting unity and diversity. That it's going to take some work, and we're going to have to meet regularly, at least annually, to do that. And that's one duty I think that the GBC members take seriously. We get a pretty good attendance. If you're talking about a worldwide body, we get pretty good attendance twice a year at our meetings. And let me, congratulate the SPT also for giving us an agenda to achieve that unity and diversity, because it's not just a sentimental discussion, but it's a discussion that involves complex elements. And to meet and discuss those, I think, is part of meeting unity and diversity.
Prabhu, you have several other GBC related duties. One is that you're the Minister of Education. Another is that you're the Minister of Justice. Maybe we can take a look at this this Minister of Justice position. What does that incorporate, and what have you done on that?
Well, other than just getting these assignments I talked about of trouble spots and trying to work to solutions, The Ministry of Justice of late is part of a unified discussion of different agencies that ISKCON has that deal with deal with disputes. We have ISKCON Resolve, we have Sannyas Ministry, we have ISKCON Leadership Misconduct Committee. There are a lot of different agencies that have sprung up in ISKCON worldwide to deal with problems. And so the Ministry of Education right now is working on a project, the Ministry of Justice right now is working on bringing all these different agencies together to form a unified dispute resolution system for ISKCON. So that outlines what exactly you can be disciplined for, how you can have your case heard, and how ultimate resolution can be made for your benefit and the benefit of ISKCON. I say your in a general term. And so that group is considering a number of worldview points that can help guide resolution of conflict. And they're grounded, we call them Gita values or Gita principles. And they're founded in Bhagavad Gita's teachings, and that can be practically used to resolve disputes, to encourage devotees in achieving their objectives in a unified way that respects diversity. And so there are 6 values basically that we try to consider when we talk about Gita values. And again, these are worldview issues.
Okay, Gita values. This is very interesting. And 6 of them. I think that you're set up to on this interview to kind of go through these, and I think it'd be really good to drill deep into them. They sound very, very interesting. Why don't you begin sharing some of this Gita value thing with us? It sounds, in fact, compelling.
Okay, thank you for the opportunity to present these. We had a committee of several devotees and also a outside consultant, a woman named Mary Rowe, who was the ombudsperson at the Massachusetts Institute for Technology for decades before she recently retired. She spent and volunteered her time to help us develop, again, a worldview, an environment in which dispute resolution can be facilitated and unity and diversity achieved. So I think that we have a look at some of these things, the first being SAMA-DARSHANA or equal vision. These are based on Bhagavad Gita's teachings, and we know the verse SAMA-DARSHANA, how one who sees with equal vision sees all different living entities the same. Now, if you take a look at this in a broader view, a universal view, this is actually a challenge to all of mankind, because it takes a look at human dignity being there for all life, not just humans. And I think this is one of the important things. This kind of human dignity is a natural basis for civilization, and not the artificial differences we create among each other in the world today. So number one, all life, not just human life, is sacred and to be protected and facilitated ultimately to achieve God consciousness. So that's SAMA-DARSHANA, or equal vision.
So on this first one, you then take that notion, it's more than a notion, you take that principle, that value, and when there's a conflict, you then look to that conflict and say, okay, is there failing here in this conflict on this particular principle. Is that how your system of justice looks at it? Tell
Yeah,
me how that works.
it would first involve reminding the participants or the disputants that they have an equal playing field here. The playing field is leveled. And so it's not that one, by position alone, can dictate how things should be and have everything go his way and not have to deal with subordinates or issues which are less important to him. First, you create a level playing field, and by doing that, you have a basis on which true agreement can be made. And so, but if we fail there, we're probably not going to get to a resolution. Certainly not a resolution that respects the differences that may be there among people. So that would be, the basis for starting any kind of dispute.
So failing to realize and act on this Sama-Darshana principle, it does sound like that is the basis of many conflicts.
Yes, it's an element, but we've chosen only 6 values from Bhagavad Gita, and all of them work together. So,
So let's go to the second one.
Yes, it's appropriate. The next one is choice. ICCHA is the Sanskrit. And ultimately, we see that it's up to the individual to apply himself or herself to the principles of Krishna consciousness, the principles found in Bhagavad Gita, to help resolve a conflict. And that involves 3 things. Taking responsibility for relationships, taking responsibility for one's service, and then executing those responsibilities. You have to decide, as our graphic shows. And of course, that's what Krishna left Arjuna with in the Bhagavad Gita. After explaining everything to him, he left it to you. Now, Arjuna, I've explained everything to you. You have to decide how you're going to act. So that eternal principle is sometimes people don't really realize that they have that power. And in a relationship, they may put themselves in a situation on the low end of a power stick. But again, Samavision, the equal vision, works with one's taking individual responsibility, and they work together in that way. So it's up to the individual to make the difference, not that something is going to be done for you automatically.
Let's go to the third one.
Third is what's one that I would consider the most important of all of them, and that is ahimsa. How we interact with others. Of course, ahimsa is a popular concept, and even our little illustration here of on the slide looks like a hand. It's only got 4 fingers, though. Oh no, it's got 5. But that's kind of like a Buddhist symbolism, and it just shows you how ahimsa is sort of seen. It's more recognized in the world than maybe some of these others currently. And so even the Buddhists have this concept of ahimsa. But the reason why it's so important is because it guides us in how we interact with others. We have to be extremely careful that our interactions with others are based in welfare for them and for others, not just for our own interests. We often think of Bhagavad Gita, and it took place on a battlefield, and so we may be questioned, well, why a battlefield if you're talking about ahimsa, nonviolence? And this is where you get some of that uncompromising spirit that I was talking about initially. yes, Bhagavad Gita talks about ahimsa, but it makes the distinction between what is proper use of violence as opposed to not proper or a destructive use of violence. This degree of subtlety has to be understood when looking at all of these Gita principles. Ahimsa is meant not that there shouldn't be or there won't be violence or warfare even, but what is the cause that one is advocating? One that advocates the cause of the Supreme Lord may act in ways in which appear to be violent, but are actually like the corrective measures of a surgeon who, with a knife, cuts to perform something for the benefit of the patient. And so ahimsa, probably the most difficult to understand, but at the same time, the most crucial for understanding how unity and diversity actually work.
Does ahimsa relate in our devotional relationships? Does it relate to being offensive and non-offensive? Are there similarities to this?
Yes. Words are very powerful, and how we use our words can either reflect a lack of ahimsa or the embodiment of ahimsa. And so in our relationships with one another, it's extremely important that our words reflect that, reflect the welfare of another. Again, back to the example of a surgeon with a scalpel. That scalpel and his use of it reflects his concern for the benefit of the patient. So similarly, our words, they have to be crafted in such a way that the welfare of the other person is taken into consideration. And when we do that, we're practicing ahimsa, the welfare of others.
Wow, really important. Let's go to the fourth of the Gita values.
That is the Acharya principle. How we interact with others, how we lead others. If we're meant to be leaders in society, and again, this goes back to what I was originally attracted to, a political party and political leaders who walked their walk and talked their talk, so to speak. That's what the Acharya principle is, teaching by example. There's an interesting little story that I like to tell about Acharya, and it involves a young mother whose son was eating too many sweets. And so she took her son to the guru and said, please tell my son to not eat so many sweets. It's not good for his health. His teeth are rotting. And so the guru said, come back in a week. And so the mother didn't know what quite to make of it, but okay, I'll come back in a week. So she went and she came back in a week with her son. And she said, you remember me, Guruji? Please tell my son to not eat so many sweets. And so the guru turned to the boy and said, don't eat so many sweets. And then he was silent. The mother was shocked. Why couldn't you have told him that a week ago? And he said to her, well, first I had to stop eating sweets myself, and then I could tell him. So the point is that teaching by example is the only way teaching really happens. And therefore, it's one of the most important of the Gita principles. You have to be able to set standards by your practical action. And that's what we're meant to do. Even if they are something that we couldn't imagine ourselves even following, it engenders the respect of others. And that's what I saw in Bhaktivedanta Prabhu and Amarendra Prabhu when they were standing on the stage with the other candidates. running for mayor of Atlanta or mayor of Gainesville. They were standing their ground and they walked their walk. They talked their talk, and therefore they had to be respected by the others on the stage. It engenders a respect when you can teach by example and you take that as a principle in your life. And so that's what the Acharya principle embodies.
Does a leader, if a person is going to accept responsibility as a leader in ISKCON, of the ones that we've spoken about so far, it seems like this one is like, if you can't do that, don't accept the position. Is that how it works?
That's how it works, yes. And that, again, it goes back to that uncompromising nature of regulating oneself. If you know that, well, I can't, I'm deficient in that way in some regard, then one who's self-aware, and all these principles sort of add up to a self-awareness type of existence. One who's self-aware will not put him in a situation, or him or his followers in a situation where he or they cannot act on this principle of Acharya by setting the example by their own personal behavior. In the original,
excellent. Let's go to number 5.
Okay, number 5 is humility. Now, humility can be looked at in a lot of different ways. Some of them there are on the screen. Not being anxious to be honored by others. But I think that the most important aspect of humility is that it encourages us to look within ourselves for self-improvement. One takes that responsibility on himself or herself to examine oneself, examine one's motives, and trying to understand why we act in a certain way, what our role is, particularly what our role is in relation to the greater scheme of things. It's a reality check, actually. That's what humility is. It's not a false sense of that I can't do anything and just shirking from responsibility, but understanding what my role actually is, what I can accomplish. And it's funny how things work in spirituality and Krishna consciousness. The very thing that you think might be detrimental to your achieving your goal, like being too humble or self-effacing, the very thing is a source of one's power in achieving one's goals in Krishna consciousness. And so humility is that one, and we see it displayed not just by Srila Prabhupada, of course. He displayed that in so many ways which are very bewildering to his disciples and followers, how he could accomplish so much but be so humble about his achievements. That was perhaps the most attractive quality of Srila Prabhupada. It led to an approachability to him that otherwise might not be available. We all have our experience trying to meet leading people. It's not always so easy. But Prabhupada made himself available because of this quality of humility. One last one. Do you have a question?
I did have a question on this one. If I wanted to grow more in developing a humble position, is there something you do, or is it just something you realize?
Well, I think humility can be gained by knowledge, by spiritual practice, and that's one way, but is also sometimes only available through the School of Hard Knocks, where we get taught lessons in humility in ways in which we wouldn't ask for to be taught that way. and we can only see the lesson after it's learned. But that's kind of the way it is with all of these Gita values, that we learn them through experience. I remember when I was a brahmachari on traveling Sankirtan, we had a group of devotees on the BBT library party who would change every week. We had 6 vans or so, and two or three devotees parties would go out during the week and go to the colleges and sell Prabhupada's books. And so some devotees by nature were easy to get along with, and some devotees were hard to get along with. So every week they put me with the ones that are hard to get along with. So I had to eat a lot of humble pie. I was a junior member of the party, and dealing with the most hard-nosed of all the devotees there. But I took my medicine, and I think it did me good, although at the time I was going through it wasn't the easiest thing in the world. But, so interaction with others teaches us humility, but we can also learn from the Shastra and from the teachings of great, and the example of great devotees. So try both, whatever works.
Okay, let's go to the next one.
The last one is Priti, or affection. Now, affection or love is at the heart of everything that we do in Krishna consciousness. Trying to express and develop our love for Krishna, and in doing so, developing our love, affection, and respect for all devotees. So it's actually the motivating principle, and it's one of the underlying elements of our ability to execute the Sankirtan movement, is that we actually feel compassion based on the affection, and we're willing to share that with others despite the difficulties, because of the tremendous satisfaction we're giving to Prabhupada, we're giving to Krishna, and that we're receiving as prasad. So it's a motivating factor that sort of hold all of these things together: SAMA-DARSHANA, or equal vision, ICCHA, or choice, AHIMSA, nonviolence, ACHARYA, what you like, and humility. Priti, or affection, holds all that together. Now, these 6 principles I found to be very effective in dealing with issues of disputes or conflict between devotees. Well, first of all, we're accepting Bhagavad Gita, which is a common scripture. And if we take out these 6 elements and try to apply them to the difficulties we're having, then they call us to a higher consciousness to try to resolve disputes with. And I think that that's what a Krishna conscious dispute resolution system really has to have as its goal, to raise one's consciousness. Someone was giving me the example the other day of a valley between 2 mountains. If you're down in the valley, it may be a storm's going on there, and you may perceive your circumstances in one way. But that very same valley, if you're up on one of the side walls of the valley, and the storm may still be going on, but because you have a higher perspective or a higher consciousness, then you see the situation differently, and you see the opportunities that may be there differently, and you see the disputes differently. And so raising one's consciousness, applying that to something like dispute resolution, has sort of revolutionized my own service, because it gives me opportunity, it gives me knowledge, skills to use in ways in which I hadn't been bringing together before. And I've found it to be useful to disputants when they seek my help.
I find this very, very compelling. I also find it kind of interesting that I kind of never heard about this, and I spend time serving the GBC and yourself and whatnot. How did you come up with these? How did this germinate and come to be one of the cornerstones of your service?
Well, it started with devotees working together in dispute resolution. A group of devotees headed by Braja Vihari, Brahmatirtha, myself, and Shaunaka Rishi from the Oxford Center. We started meeting with Mary Rowe, who's the ombudsperson from the MIT that I mentioned. And she actually guided us. She helped us to try to develop some basic worldview with respect to disputes and how Krishna consciousness, our own philosophy, could be utilized to develop tools to deal with conflict. And so we met several times in Washington, D.C. You may know Henry Shellenkoff. He was gracious enough to give us a facility to meet. And we just sat down for several days at a time, studying Bhagavad Gita and what we wanted our message to disputes. What will be our message in disputes? So, I mean, we went over some of these things, and being an expert at dispute resolution, Mary helped us to conceptualize how these things, which are core to our belief and practices every day, can be utilized to deal with some of the difficult problems that we face in our service.
Do you have plans for future development on how to utilize these concepts?
Well, as you mentioned, why you haven't heard of it, and that's a very good question, because you and the SPT bring innovative ideas to the society. Maybe just the time is just we're trying to catch up, and maybe this is part of the catching up by talking with you today, introducing these things. But certainly, I think Braja Vihari worked closely with you, and being the real contact with Mary, he can certainly help integrate these things in other programs.
Yeah, I think that we should come up with some plans to illuminate these more and create a broader awareness of them. They're so great. It just seems like we could even maybe do some video series on them, something. I mean, right now I'm just, I'm not forming clear thoughts on a plan, but maybe if you and I and Braja Vihari could get together, we could talk about how we could illuminate this more and create some sort of you're the Minister of Education, create some educational elements around it.
Yeah, I think it's time to do that. I mean, the development work took place. I've used it effectively over the last couple of years, and sort of tested the model. And if it can be now developed and propagated, I think it's time.
If there's something we can do to help, we would love to. It's a very, very compelling way of looking at life, frankly.
Yeah, and I think that it has those elements, what I was talking about at the beginning of not having to compromise. And to give that group credit, besides myself, I think that they wanted something that was ours, not just a system made by professionals or academics outside. But what about our own worldview, our own daily lives can we use to apply to problems that we have. And so these 6, and of course there are more. We chose these 6. They could have another 6 or another 6 after that, to make the philosophy, the religious practice practical. And again, this is why I joined the Christian Consciousness Movement. Spiritual life was practical. It meant some practical application of the teachings. And in the case of when I joined, a political activity. But for whatever reason, anyone joins, a dispute in the ashram between 2 brahmacharis, whatever it is, if we have something that's our own, the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita, if we take them as our own and utilize them, I think we put ourselves in a strong position.
So we're getting close to the end of our time together. Maybe just a few words on any advice you have, particularly for, say, younger devotees or devotees who are just joining us, joining ISKCON. What general advice would you offer them? You've been through a lot on one hand, and on another hand, you've been a leader, and we'd be interested in hearing some general advice.
Well, I think the most general advice, the most effective general advice I would give to new persons new to Krishna consciousness is to be patient. Generally speaking, when someone takes to a new path, particularly a breakout path like Krishna consciousness, they tend to want it all right now. And if they don't get it all right now, that has a tendency to discourage them. I think you need to be patient, especially if you're talking about issues of morality, ethics, dispute resolutions principles like we have here with the Gita values. Gita values, by the way, are more ethical statements, ethical behavior statements. So when it comes to those things, we want it all at once, but we have to understand that our worldview, Krishna conscious worldview, is so much different than that around us, for the world around us, that if we're not patient and we hear or see certain types of behavior, we may not understand them, and we may mistake them for something that they're not. For instance, humility. A humble person, people may mistake that for weakness of some kind, but it's actually the strength. And so be patient and execute the process, and then you'll see the results come. It's not easy, especially in terms of these ethical things. And when I was teaching introduction to ethics at Bhaktivedanta College in Radhadesh, Belgium, I would often put the problem to my students on the examinations about the behavior of Bhishma Dev. Bhishma Dev was a Mahajan, we know. And yet he was there when Draupadi was stripped naked, or attempt was made to strip her naked in this vicious assembly. So how could he do that? Was he a virtuous person or not? He's a devotee of the Lord, but was he a virtuous person or not? How could he sit there and do that? Well, these are complex questions of Dharma, and it's not easy to understand them unless you absorb yourself in the worldview. It's easy to criticize from the outside. So be patient. I think that would be the message to any new devotee.
Excellent. Well, Prabhu, it's been really wonderful talking with you. I really do want to follow up with you and Braj on these 6 Gita values. And, just thank you so much for your valuable time and introducing this to at least some of us. Some of us it's introducing because we've never heard it. And it's just a wonderful way of looking at things. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Gopal Bhatta, for the opportunity to present it.
Okay, we'll end now. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Hare Krishna.
All glories to Srila Prabhupada.
Hare